We know the first month should start in the spring, based on the meaning of the word Abib. But when exactly? First of all, we know the months start on the new moons, or the first visible crescent of the new moon, which is usually the next day. And we know this because the Hebrew word for month literally means new moon. And the text specifically say to start each month on that day, on the new moon or the first visible sign of it. But which new moon of the spring season should be the first month of the year? We have a clue in Exodus 34. It says, the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Ingathering should be observed at the year's end. But we know the Feast of Weeks starts in the first month, and the Feast of Ingathering, otherwise known as Sukkot, or Tabernacles, is in the 7th month. So neither the first month or the 7th month is in the end of the year. So what is this referring to here? Well, this word actually means a turning. So Exodus 34:22 is telling us the Feast of Weeks, which starts in the first month, and the Feast of Ingathering, which is in the 7th month, should be observed at the turning of the year. Well, what is the turning of the year? The turning of the year is the changing of the seasons. It's literally the turning of the earth around the sun and the tilt of the axis that causes the changes in the seasons. So there are 4 of these turnings per year: spring, summer, fall, and winter. And we know the first month happens in the spring, so the turning it's referring to in that month is the spring equinox, and the turning in the 7th month is the fall equinox. But in ancient times, the humans didn't have scientific means for determining the exact timing of the equinoxes. But it's important to understand how they did determine this if we want to find the true appointments for the future that the Elohim gave them. We don't know how they did it for sure, which is why there's so much debate over the subject, but we do have clues. First of all, and we already talked about this, but they were not told to determine it by the greening of the barley or any other subjective means. Instead, they were told to determine the turning by the sun and moon. So the greater light is the sun, and the lesser light of the night is the moon, and those are to be used for the seasons, for the days, and for the years. So the turning of the year would have to be determined by looking at the movements of the sun and the moon from our perspective on Earth. And the first thing the ancient humans may have noticed is that in the northern hemisphere, summer, the sun appears to rise and set more toward the north. So this is facing to the east, and the sun is rising more toward the northern orientation. In the summertime in the northern hemisphere. And in the northern hemisphere winter, the sun rises and sets more toward the south. So we also observe a similar cycle with the rising of the full moon, only the opposite. In the winter, the full moon rises over the horizon to the north of due east, and in the summer, the full moon rises more to the south of due east. But an easier way to remember this is if you go outside at sunset on the night of the full moon in the summertime, the sun will be setting to the right of due west, and the moon, the full moon, will be rising to the right of due east. And in the winter, the sun would be setting to the left of due west, while the full moon is rising to the left of due east. So an even easier way to remember this is, if you're living in the northern hemisphere, winter left, summer right. So winter left, summer right. And this is the turn of the sun and moon. From the at the spring and fall equinox, the turn is occurring right in the middle of these two locations, from the northern and the southern perspective. So this turn of the sun and the moon from the northern to the southern skies each year was the ancient marker of the changing of the season. And this is the turning of the year that will determine when the first month and the seventh month should be observed. So you might think that the ancient people could just project when the turning would occur and start their first month accordingly, expecting the turn to occur sometime during the Feast of Weeks, but it's a little more complicated than that without our modern technology. In modern times, on the Gregorian calendar, we know the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere occurs around March 20th. But this is because we add an extra day to the month of February every fourth year, the leap year. And the modern Jews also have a system set up in which they add a 13th month every so many years. But in ancient times, the humans would have had to go outside and watch for the turn. And if you imagine all of the different living conditions all over the earth, it becomes clear how this observance could be very uncertain if you had to try to catch it on the exact day of the turn. Right now we're looking at this software program and it's very simple for us to look at this and see that, okay, this represents west, and it's obvious that the sun is perfectly center on west on March 20th. But if you had to actually go outside to watch for the turn with your own eyes, you might have to take a trip to a higher location like the top of a hill or out onto an open plain. And even if you had a marker like a monument or something around your home that marked where the equinox location was, others might not agree with you, and especially if they were on the other side of the earth, completely unaware of your observations, they might come to a different conclusion. So if this calendar was meant for everyone on the earth, then in order to keep everyone in harmony, it makes sense that they would wait until the sun and moon made a full and obvious turn. So instead of going out every day at sunset, waiting for the sun to hit the exact center of due west, it makes more sense that they would set a specific day to check for the turn in the 12th month. That way, if they had to take a trip in order to have a better view of the horizon, they wouldn't have to make that trip every day. I mean, remember, most of them were traveling on foot, so a trip to the mountains or the plains might take a few weeks. So it makes sense that they probably checked for the turn on the night of the full moon in the 12th month, since the moon is easier to see when it's full, and they would have needed to check both the sun and the moon for the turn. And also, that would give them 2 weeks to prepare for the first day of the month, which is the new moon. And we're about to look at some very convincing signs that occurred in recent years on the ancient appointed times that seem to confirm that this method we're about to look at is the method the ancients used to determine the appointed times each year.